Hello everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. I hope that you are all doing well. This is where I talk about the books that I'm reading. I like to read diverse books and I highlight Canadian literature. If you are new to my channel, thank you so much for checking it out. Please hit subscribe and stick around. Today I am going to be doing my August wrap up. I really want to get this out before September ends. I have several books to share. I still I can't believe it's September. We're nearing the end of September now. And I still haven't read a book that's just blown me away this year. Normally by now I have at least 10 to 20 5-star reads. And so far I have a couple of 5 stars, but nothing that, I am recommending to everyone that I talk to. So I'm still on the lookout for a 5-star read that will knock my socks off. A couple of my August reads did come close. So there are a few here that were very, very close. So let's have a look at my stats in August first. So for moods, it seems it was a very moody month. Reflective, informative, emotional would be the top moods. Those are followed by tense, mysterious, dark, and that is followed by sad, inspiring, hopeful, and challenging. So a lot going on mood-wise. Pace is pretty consistent to what it normally is with me. Medium pace at 88%, slow pace at 13%. Which I do know adds up to 101, but this is what Storygraph told me, so we're going to go with the flow. 63% of my August books were between 300 and 499 pages, and 38% were less than 300 pages, and that seems like a really high percentage for me for the shorter books, but I'm sure it will be even higher in September. 75% of my reading in August was fiction and 25% was nonfiction. And this is so weird how consistent this is for me month after month after month. For genres, this is where there's a bit of diversity again. Literary is the most read genre, which does make total sense. Then historical, and those are followed by sociology, thriller, romance, mystery, memoir, horror, history, and biography. And finally, the average rating for the books that I read in August is 3.84. So that's been staying pretty consistent as well. But I'm hoping that before the end of 2024, I have a reading month with an average over 4 stars. That would be awesome. I would love for that to happen. Okay, let's get to these books. The TBR stack currently sits at 1,527. So let's start bringing that number down. And the first book that I'm going to talk about is God Help the Child by Toni Morrison. And this is the final book that was part of the reading project that I was doing with AJ from AJ Dunn. So I have now officially read all the books, but I still have to put out videos for the last 3 books that I read, and it keeps getting put off by life and other things, but I will eventually finish them, so stay tuned for those videos where I will go into more depth about this book and the others as well. So this brings the TBR stack to 1,526. The next book I read was for the Reading Across Canada Challenge. The prompt in August was to read a Canadian book by a woman in translation for Women in Translation Month. And I read To the Forest by Anais Barbeau-Lavalette. This is translated from the French by Rhonda Mullins. And when I first started this book, I thought it was going to be a 5-star. I loved the writing, the language, and it's written in short vignettes that give glimpses into the narrator's life and family and thoughts. And I loved all those things. The descriptions were amazing, whether they were about nature or about, various family members, various characters. It gave me a real sense of place and knowing some of the characters. So this is a story about two families who go to the forest to the childhood home of the main character. And this started off, as I said, really good. And I loved the connection to nature. But probably about halfway, maybe just over halfway, it kind of lost me. And the story is not told in a linear way. And it kind of goes all over the place. So sometimes I wasn't sure where I was. Like what timeline I was in or what was being talked about. But up until that point, I was loving it. So there's a lot of loss, a lot of death in this. It did make me even more interested to read her other book, Suzanne, because I think it's also written in little vignettes, but it focuses on one person, and I think that might help. So this brings the TBR stack to 1,525. The next book was the August book selection for the Reading Across Canada book club. Before I start talking about this book, I have to say that I love Jane Urquhart. I've read about 4 of her other books and have just devoured them. I've loved them. She also has a new book out that I want to read called In the Winter I Get Up at Night. So I was really, really looking forward to reading Sanctuary Line, again by Jane Urquhart. So in the end, I felt that this book was a book full of missed opportunities. While I was reading it, my hope was that when the book club met, that the other members would kind of help me see what I was missing and, give me a new perspective. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. So Jane Urquhart's writing is beautiful. She can write beautiful sentences and paragraphs. She finds very interesting ways to describe things. So the prose is excellent. But the story just didn't work for me. In the beginning, I thought, there was so many things that were kind of being set up. So there's the farmhouse where the story takes place. It could have easily been a character itself, which I love, and that didn't really happen. Butterflies could have easily been symbolic in the story, but I didn't see that connection. It's called Sanctuary Line for the road, and I thought the name of it would be connected to the story in a deeper way, because it is there a little bit. There were so many things like this that I thought, was going to make a very interesting story with a lot of layers. But if they are there, I missed it. The story is basically about a woman, Liz, who inherits her family farm. She is studying the migratory pathways of monarch butterflies. And while she is there, she is remembering stories of her family in the past. So Liz is the niece of the man who owned the house, and her cousin Amanda, who was in the military, has died. And I did think that the choice to have the narrator of the story be the niece, I thought that was, an interesting one, rather than one of the more central characters in the family. So yeah, I thought that was interesting, and I liked it because it gave a different perspective. She was limited in what she knew, and also because of her age and the stories that she's telling. So she understood things in a different way than she does reflecting back on it as an adult. And I liked that about it. Liz is the one that I understood the theme of Sanctuary Line the most, but I didn't love this story like other Urquhart books. It didn't draw me into the story in the same way. So this brings the TBR to 1,524. Next up, I have some most anticipated books, and this first one I thought was going to be more of the experience that I had as I described Sanctuary Line, because I had heard other people kind of describe it in similar ways. But I really liked this one, Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. It's true, this is a quieter story, and in some ways a story within a story. So this takes place on a cherry orchard in Michigan, but I felt place was not so important in this. They really could have been anywhere. It's during the pandemic, and Lyra's 3 daughters come to stay with her and her husband. And while they are picking cherries, they get their mother to tell them about Peter Duke. And Peter is a famous actor who Lyra knew when she was younger and had a romantic relationship with as well. And one of the daughters has always been obsessed by him in a way, and believed when she was younger that Peter was her father. So Lyra shares how she became an actress in the play Our Town, and how this changed the trajectory of her life and the people that she met. And I thought that the characters were written very well. Like, all 3 of the daughters, are very distinct. They all have their own personality. Their relationship with Lyra is distinct as well. And the character of Lyra herself, I think, is very interesting, especially in how she knows her daughters and what she chooses to tell the daughters. And also what she doesn't tell them. So I really enjoyed how this was written. I do still have a question, though, because I felt like something was left ambiguous. So if you've read this, please reach out to me, because I think there's still a secret, and I don't want to spoil it. But perhaps I missed something as well. The second most anticipated read for me was Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. And this is a true story of J.D. Vance's upbringing. It's a coming-of-age story, and I wanted to read this before watching the movie on Netflix. So Vance describes the intentional decision that his grandparents made to move the family to Ohio from Kentucky to escape poverty. And they were successful. The family became, middle class, but they still struggled with alcoholism, addictions, and violence. And the characters in this book were very, very colorful, especially Vance's grandmother. And you could tell that many of these relationships were extremely important to him. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the book Running with Scissors, if you've read that. It's by Augustine Burroughs. It has the dysfunctional family and unorthodox upbringing, and it's really about survival. So the difference between the two is that in Running with Scissors, I read that so long ago, but I remember feeling part of the story. And with Hillbilly Elegy, it felt very distant. It felt like the author himself was at a distance telling the story, even though he lived it. So that might be a coping mechanism on his part, but it was really, I really felt it while I was reading it. I did watch the movie after reading the book, and there are things that I liked about both. The casting was amazing for the movie, but there were things, as usual, left out that we had an inside scoop into in the book. So I was glad that I read it first. The book is worth a read if you are interested in, memoirs or family dynamics. So I don't think that I agree with some of his conclusions as well, but I didn't live it, so I'm not really one to comment on that. Okay, so another most anticipated read for me was And Then She Fell by Alicia Elliott. This is Alicia Elliott's debut fiction, and I was really, really looking forward to reading it. I really liked how it started. The main character, Alice, and Alice, I do wonder if Alicia Elliott named her Alice, like of the famed Alice in Wonderland, who also took a fall. But the main character is obsessed with Pocahontas. That's how the story begins. And Pocahontas also appears to her and kind of helps to guide her in a way. So from the beginning, you know that the story is going to be a little different. So like Pocahontas, the story that is told about her isn't reality. And for Alice, the story that she tells herself about her life isn't reality either. And Alice has a newborn baby, and she's struggling to connect with her, which gives Alice anxiety and guilt, as a mother. And other than that, she feels like her life is good. She's happily married to a white man who is supportive, and she believes she lives a really, really good life. So when things start to unravel for Alice, she thinks that she will find the answer by connecting back to her own Haudenosaunee culture. And she wants to rewrite the creation story. And there are so many things that I loved about this story. First, Alicia's writing, she's a very talented writer. I also loved the nostalgia in the story, and there are some very funny lines as well. I laughed out loud. The voice in the story is excellent, and the horror, scenes could be uncomfortable, which, they're supposed to be. So the one thing that I do wish is that I would have been able to read this for longer periods of time. I was, only reading it bits at a time, and then I would come back to it and read another little bit, only when I could. And I think that didn't help because it would take me a while to get back into the story. So when I could read for larger chunks, it was much more helpful, and I could follow it a little bit easier. So I look forward to reading more by Alicia Elliott. So with these 3 most anticipated books, that brings the TBR stack to 1,521. Next up are books that were recommended to me at some point. And the first one was recommended by Wabgashig Rice when I chatted with him after he was a judge for the Giller. This is a few years ago. And I will leave a link to that video below if you're interested. But Wab recommended In the Upper Country by Kai Thomas, which is a debut novel. And I will say, for a debut novel, the writing was superb. I thought the concept of this book was also really interesting. You have Lucinda Martin, who is a Black journalist living in Dunmore, which is in Ontario. This is the community that has been settled by slaves. These slaves are escaping into Canada from the US. And then there's Cash, who is an elderly woman, and she's in hiding in the town because she has killed a slave hunter. So these 2 women exchange their stories and realize that their stories have, a common link or common links. So this, I think, in a way, is one of the biggest messages of the book, which is how interconnected the Black culture and Indigenous cultures are, and really how interconnected we all are. So this is also a really good story to learn more about the Underground Railroad, especially in Canada, which is, we do talk about it, we learn about it in school, but it's an important part of our history that I don't think gets talked about enough. There were many parts of this story that I found riveting. The only thing for me with this story is that there was a lot going on. There are a lot of characters, and it sometimes made me lose where the story was. But Kai Thomas is definitely an author that I will keep an eye out for, and I hope that he publishes something soon. Okay, next is a recommendation by a fellow booktuber, and this might seem strange, but I don't actually know who it is. So I do know that it's one of 3 booktubers. So you will learn more about this and the mystery next month. But for now, I get to tell you about this book. So it's The Plot by Jean Hanff Koelitz. This is a book that I probably would never have picked up if not for the recommendation. But it is one of those books that I continue to think about, and the more I reflect on it, the more I like it. So I thought that it was clever in so many ways. I enjoyed there's wordplay. The story is about a professor who is a famous author, but hasn't published anything in a while, and so the fame is dwindling, and he's now teaching writing. And he basically steals a story from one of his students after he finds out that the student has died, he's passed away. And this decision has major consequences that lead to all kinds of chaos. So I loved that the author uses real examples of authors who stole ideas or works. And the school is even named Ripley, which I thought was fun. So now, it did take forever for me to get into this story, like probably halfway through. And I didn't connect with the main character all the time. It wasn't until the book The Crib, which it became part of the story. So The Crib is the story that is the stolen story. That's when it got more interesting for me, and I found it, interesting to see how the 2 stories connected. In one of the quotes, Stephen King says about this book that it shows how authors think and write. And it's true that it does show their worries and thought process. And I did figure out the ending, but it still felt that it was compelling enough to read. And there is a sequel coming out called The Sequel. It's coming out in October, so I think I might check that out. All right, the last recommendation is a book that was recommended to me a long time ago by my friend Miranda. And it's nonfiction, and it's been sitting on my shelf for over a decade. And it's Cleopatra by Stacy Schiff. Now, I didn't know a whole lot about Cleopatra, really. So from the beginning of the book, I found a lot of it fascinating, and I certainly learnt some things. And definitely as a woman of her time, she was very significant. And I think that's what I enjoyed most about the book, was seeing how she had such an impact of the time, and really even now, how as a woman she had influence in her time. She was a leader, she was intelligent, and she used the means that were available to her. So I have to admit that I did zone out a few times, but I think that's more me than the book. So it's always interesting to me when someone writes a biography about someone without too much information, and has to imagine some of it according to the time, and to the character of the person as well. So if you are interested in learning more about Cleopatra, then I would say that this is a great start, a great book for that. So it might also be an option for nonfiction November. So with these 3 recommendations, it brings the TBR stack to 1,518, and that's where it will stay for now until I do my September book haul. Hopefully, cross your fingers, we can keep it lower than 1,530. So please let me know if you have read any of these, or if you are interested in any of these. What books did you read in August that you loved, that you think I would enjoy? I can't wait to hear all about it. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.